Have you ever wondered whether those who seem strong, self-contained, even defiant those who appear not to care are truly immune to the fear of abandonment? Or could it be that their control, their manipulation, their aloofness are in fact a fragile disguise, concealing a vulnerability too raw to reveal? For many years, our culture has taught us that the fear of being left behind belongs to those who are visibly dependent, emotionally needy, or psychologically fragile. But I want to gently invite you to consider that this assumption may be deeply misleading, especially when it comes to narcissistic individuals. Welcome back to my channel. This is a space where we take the time to explore the intricate terrain of human psychology, particularly where it intersects with the storms and tensions of our closest relationships. Today, I'd like to uncover something rarely spoken about when it comes to narcissism: the profound and often hidden fear of abandonment that so many narcissistic individuals carry. This isn't simply a clinical theory. It's a living truth, one that may hold the key to understanding behaviors that have long confused you and perhaps even wounded you. In the moments ahead, I will walk with you through the emotional architecture of this fear, how it silently fuels patterns of abuse cycling from idealization to devaluation, and why leaving a narcissist often provokes such intense and sometimes frightening reactions. We'll trace the path from the early wounds of separation to the adult attempts at domination, and why the act of leaving, even temporarily, can feel to them like an existential threat. Together, we'll explore how the primitive fear of abandonment, similar to the terror a child feels when severed from a caregiver, can continue to echo through the mind of an adult with narcissistic tendencies. We'll look at how certain insecure attachment styles, whether anxious, disorganized, or avoidant, form the invisible foundation beneath these behaviors. And you might come to see why, in the days before a trip, your narcissistic partner becomes agitated, irritable, even provocative. Or why, when you return home, they meet you not with warmth, but with coldness, distance, a chilly wall, instead of an embrace. And here is where it becomes even more fascinating, if also more painful. We will uncover the paradox behind what psychologists call hoovering, when someone who abandoned you suddenly returns, pulling you back in. I will show you how sometimes a narcissist leaves first, not because they no longer care, but because the pain of being left is too much to bear. They are attempting to stay ahead of the hurt they expect from you, but the fear doesn't go away. It never really does, so they return. And thus begins the cycle of push and pull, of grasping and rejecting again and again. I invite you to stay with me until the end of this video. What we're about to unfold together may not only deepen your understanding of narcissism, but may also bring clarity and strength to those of you who have lived through such relationships or are in the tender, difficult process of stepping away. My intention is not to judge or diagnose, but to illuminate, so that the confusion may soften and you may find yourself standing on firmer ground. Let's begin this journey into the hidden wound behind the mask of narcissism. What we discover might change the way you see everything. In the landscape of narcissistic relationships, there is a predictable cycle, one that repeats with unsettling regularity, yet can feel disorienting every time it occurs. This cycle often begins with a phase of idealization. The narcissistic partner showers you with affection, attention, promises of deep connection. This stage is sometimes called love bombing, an overwhelming flood of validation that may feel like the very thing your heart has longed for. They may display what looks like empathy, attunement, even admiration. But if you look closely, you'll begin to see that much of it is performative, carefully crafted to secure your devotion. Once they sense they have you, once your heart has opened and your trust is engaged, something quietly shifts. The energy of pursuit wanes. The excitement of the chase gives way to a cooling, a distancing. What once felt warm becomes brittle. Subtle criticisms begin to surface. Your flaws are pointed out, not with concern, but with contempt. Where there was intimacy, now there is condescension. The very parts of you that were once cherished become targets for disdain. This is not about who you are. It is about their internal script, a pattern set long before you ever met them. The cruelty of this dynamic is that the pursuit, the phase where you felt most wanted, is often the most emotionally engaging part for the narcissistic individual. That's where they feel alive. That's when they feel in control. And because of that, they are almost always the one who threatens to leave first. They want the power to exit the final, say the ability to shape the ending. Yet increasingly, many people in these relationships find the courage to walk away. As awareness grows, there is a slow but steady movement of individuals who recognize the damage, the emotional cost of staying, and begin to reclaim their sense of self. But what happens when the narcissistic person is the one left behind? For someone built on the illusion of control, being left is more than a disappointment. It is a collapse. It represents a loss of narrative authority, a disruption in the script they thought they were writing. They don't just lose a partner, they lose a mirror that once reflected their worth, a stage on which they could perform a source of validation, comfort, and control. And the reaction to that loss can range from cold detachment to overt rage. You might hear phrases laced with scorn like, "You really think you'll be okay without me," or "You're nothing without what I gave you." Or you might hear nothing at all, only silence and indifference. But beneath these postures, beneath the anger, the mockery, the indifference, there often lies something far more human, a deep vulnerability, a raw fear of abandonment. It is this hidden wound, rarely acknowledged, and often covered in bravado, that silently drives much of their behavior. To lose someone is to lose access not only to another person, but to the emotional scaffolding that props up their fragile sense of self. They may not show it, and they may not know how to name it, but the pain is real, and it runs deep. When we think about abandonment, we often associate it with people who appear emotionally fragile or visibly dependent individuals who wear their wounds more openly, whose inner worlds seem more transparent. We tend to imagine that those who show strength, aloofness, or even arrogance, especially those with narcissistic tendencies, are somehow immune to this experience. We assume that they are too cold, too self-sufficient, too emotionally detached to be touched by something as raw as the fear of being left. But I'd like to offer another way of seeing. Abandonment is not always about what has been done to us. It is often about how we interpret, how we experience the presence or absence of connection. And in this sense, separation can occur in many subtle and seemingly harmless forms. It can be triggered not only by physical desertion, but by ordinary moments in everyday life. A partner going away on a work trip, coming home late, needing a few hours alone, or simply shifting attention elsewhere. These are not, in themselves, acts of cruelty or neglect. But for some people, especially those who carry unresolved attachment wounds, these small moments of disconnection can strike at something deeply primal. In the case of someone with narcissistic patterns, it is not accurate to say they are unaffected by abandonment. On the contrary, what we often fail to see is that their nervous system doesn't regulate separation well at all. They may not show it on the surface. In fact, their defenses, controlling, blaming, withdrawing, are often designed to obscure just how vulnerable they feel inside. But beneath that defensive layer, there is a profound sensitivity to loss, to disconnection, to the possibility of being left behind. This takes us into the realm of attachment theory. While the term may sound clinical, it speaks to something very human, the ways in which we learn from the earliest moments of life, whether others are safe to rely on. Narcissistic individuals often carry patterns of insecure attachment, anxious, disorganized, or avoidant. These are not conscious choices. They are strategies the developing child once used to survive emotional uncertainty. If you imagine what it's like to grow up never knowing whether your emotional needs will be met, never sure if love will be consistent or conditional, you begin to understand why the adult version of that child might struggle to feel securely rooted in connection. For them, closeness can feel both intoxicating and dangerous. The prospect of separation, however minor, can ignite a storm of panic, shame, and rage, all beneath the surface. And so for someone with this kind of attachment injury, every moment of parting becomes a kind of crisis. Even when nothing is said, even when no harm is meant, the mere sense of someone pulling away, going to work, turning off their phone, needing solitude can trigger a flood of emotions rooted not in the present, but in an ancient pain from long ago. That is the difficult paradox of narcissistic attachment. What looks like indifference may be the scar tissue of too much longing. What feels like manipulation may be the desperate attempt to control a reality that once felt uncontrollable. The fear of abandonment is not absent. It is simply buried, encoded in the nervous system, and activated by the very thing they try to avoid: intimacy and its ever-present shadow separation. Perhaps you've experienced this. You're preparing to leave for a work trip, or maybe they are. It could be a family obligation a few days apart, nothing permanent, nothing unusual. And yet, out of nowhere, the atmosphere begins to shift. You might notice the tension rise slowly at first. The conversations become clipped. Small disagreements begin to multiply. Things that would ordinarily pass unnoticed suddenly ignite arguments. The person you love or have tried so hard to reach seems more irritable, more reactive. You find yourself thinking, why is this happening now? I just wanted these last moments together to feel calm, even tender. But the harder you try to create peace, the more chaotic it seems to become. In some cases, the situation escalates to an explosive argument on the way to the airport or even moments before departure. There's a kind of emotional combustion that leaves you bewildered. And perhaps what's even more disorienting is what happens when you reunite. Instead of a warm embrace, you're met with distance. The person may act cool, withdrawn, strangely indifferent, as though your return doesn't matter, or worse, as though it somehow wounded them. This pattern, this emotional turbulence before and after separations, is not rare. In fact, it is a signature of attachment injury, and it shows up time and again in those who struggle with insecure attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. Beneath the surface, what's being activated is not a conscious choice, but an ancient wound, a deeply rooted fear of being left behind. And this wound doesn't reason or follow adult timelines. It doesn't understand that a trip is temporary or that love isn't erased by physical distance. Instead, this wound reacts as if the separation is final, catastrophic. It doesn't matter who is leaving. It doesn't matter whether the narcissistic partner is the one traveling or the one staying behind. The emotional brain interprets any separation as abandonment, and not just any abandonment, but a kind that threatens their very sense of self. It is a rupture that echoes the early experience of a child who cannot yet grasp that their caregiver is a separate being who leaves the room and might return. But in the child's world, it feels like the world itself has vanished. This is not an adult farewell. It's not the kind of parting that includes a sense of mutual respect and anticipation for reconnection. It is at its core the terror of a young child who believes that when someone they depend on disappears, it means something essential has been lost, perhaps forever. For someone with narcissistic tendencies, this fear lives beneath layers of defenses, control, grandiosity, blame, but it is very much alive. And when it is triggered, it floods the system with distress, often masked as anger or detachment. That is why, in the final hours before a separation, you might be pulled into arguments you don't understand, and upon return, find yourself treated not as someone missed, but as someone resented. And here's what is both tragic and illuminating, even when it is the narcissistic individual who initiates the departure, the reaction is still there. The emotional system does not differentiate. The very act of leaving, even if chosen by them, ignites the same cascade of fear and confusion. It is not about logic. It is about emotional memory, a memory that predates language and remains etched in the nervous system. So when you witness these behaviors, when the person seems to sabotage moments of connection, or when your presence is met with coldness after absence, what you're really seeing is the legacy of an early wound playing itself out again and again. And unless it is brought into awareness, it will continue to shape their relational world like a ghost they can't name. Please stay with me, because what I'm about to share next may surprise you even more. We're not done uncovering the hidden landscape behind this pattern. There is a paradox, a painful contradiction that reveals even deeper truths about what's driving these cycles. And understanding it may offer you not only clarity, but also a quiet sense of relief that perhaps it was never your fault. There is something quietly paradoxical I've observed in people who appear fiercely independent, self-contained, or even defiant. Beneath their hardened exterior, beneath the confrontational tone or dismissive shrug, lives a deep sensitivity, a raw nerve, easily touched by even the smallest gesture of rejection. Those with oppositional personalities, those who often resist or push against others, tend to be exquisitely sensitive to being turned away. A canceled plan, an unanswered message, or someone simply not wanting to come over for dinner. These small and seemingly trivial events can stir in them a surprising emotional instability. To the outside world, this may seem disproportionate, but inside these moments ignite something old and tender, a subtle, quieter form of abandonment fear. This fear is not always explosive or dramatic. It's not necessarily the sobbing child left behind at the school gate. Instead, it's a quieter erosion, a trembling just under the surface. When someone they care about says, "I can't make lunch today," it may land not just as a change in schedule, but as a loss of love or a loss of respect. Not intellectually, of course, they might know it's not meant that way, but emotionally, the nervous system receives it as a threat, as something disorienting, even wounding. The body responds before the mind understands. And the reaction that follows is often not one of sadness or vulnerability, but of defensiveness. Because for the narcissistic personality, admitting such vulnerability feels dangerous. It exposes a part of themselves they have long believed must remain hidden at all costs. So instead of saying, "This hurts," they say, or rather show something else: anger, withdrawal, sarcasm, contempt, anything that masks the pain and restores the illusion of strength. You might find yourself bewildered when someone someone strong-willed and self-assured, becomes unexpectedly reactive over something so small. You may think, why are they making such a big deal out of nothing? But what looks like a small rejection to you may register as a profound threat to them. And here lies the disconnection. You're responding to reality, but they're reacting to a wound. And because they don't want to feel weak, or more truthfully, because they're terrified of feeling weak, they are far more likely to be angry with you than to explore what's happening inside themselves. The pain is projected outward, turned into blame or accusation, because turning inward is simply too frightening. What makes this even more painful is that your efforts to be kind, to soothe, to reassure may not bring the relief you hope for. In fact, sometimes your gentle tone, your soft words, your concern can be met with contempt. Because in reflecting their vulnerability back to them, you unintentionally reveal what they're trying so hard to hide. And for someone who has survived by covering up their fragility, being seen in that rawness can feel humiliating, even enraging. So what we're left with is a painful contradiction. On the outside, a person who seems strong, dismissive, or angry. But on the inside, a being who is deeply unsettled by the prospect of disconnection, so much so that they may strike out before they even know why. This isn't manipulation in the calculated sense. It's a survival strategy, a way to regain control over an emotion that once felt unbearable. When we begin to see these reactions not as personal attacks, but as evidence of something unhealed, something unspoken, something exiled long ago, we may find the space to stop blaming ourselves and perhaps to stop absorbing the emotional charge that never belonged to us in the first place. When we speak about the fear of abandonment, our minds often turn to what is known as borderline personality dynamics. Within that framework, strong reactions to the threat of being left are expected: desperation, volatility, emotional intensity. The image we associate with this fear is often one of a visibly fragile person overwhelmed by the possibility of being alone. But what if I told you that narcissistic individuals Those who seem so self-assured, so focused on control, even at times manipulative, may carry a similar wound, though buried much deeper beneath the surface. The fear of abandonment and borderline personality traits are often spoken of in the same breath, and for good reason. But what's less understood is how closely narcissistic patterns can be connected to the same early injuries, the same developmental ruptures in attachment. And when we view narcissism not as a character flaw, but as a coping strategy rooted in disconnection, the crisis of abandonment that narcissistic individuals experience begins to make profound sense. We simply don't expect it. We don't see the desperation or instability that might accompany borderline behaviors. But the fear is there, masked, hidden, transformed into something else. And in that hiddenness, it may even become more dangerous, both for them and for the people close to them. This is where I'd like to bring in the phenomenon known as hoovering. You may have experienced it without knowing its name. You might have found yourself asking, if they're so afraid of being abandoned, why did they leave me, and why are they now trying to pull me back? It's a painful paradox, but here's what often happens. When someone is terrified of being left, one way to manage that fear is to leave first, to preempt the pain, to stay one step ahead of the threat. By walking away before you do, they maintain a sense of control not only over the situation, but over their own emotional exposure. It's like bracing yourself before a loud noise rather than being startled by it, and so they leave. They may push you away, say hurtful things, end the relationship abruptly, but underneath that reaction is not always indifference. Sometimes it's a survival instinct, a way of avoiding the deep discomfort of being the one left behind. But once that move is made, something primitive is often awakened, a longing, a question. Can I still get them back? That inner conflict, pushing away and then reaching back, creates what we call a disorganized pattern. Go away, no, come back. Wait, don't go. No, I can't have you here. These mixed signals are not only confusing to you, they are tormenting to the person sending them. And this is where hoovering begins. You may be drawn in again. The charm returns, the promises, the warmth that makes you hope things will be different. But soon the cycle repeats. Like a child who lashes out, the caregiver leaves, and then the child desperately tries to draw them back, not out of malice, but out of fear. For many narcissistic individuals, the fear of abandonment is not just about losing a person. It is about losing a source of validation, of control, of identity. It is about losing the supply, the psychological fuel that helps them hold themselves together. And when that threat appears, deep shame is often triggered. The shame of rejection, the unbearable sense that they were not enough. When we begin to see it this way, it can start to make more sense. Not easier to live with, but perhaps less baffling. Because the emotional roller coaster of being in a relationship with a narcissistic person is not random. It is often driven by forces they themselves don't fully understand. So if you've felt caught in these cycles, if you've wondered how someone can push you away and then beg you to come back, you're not imagining things. The dynamic is real, and it's rooted not in your failure to love them properly, but in their own unresolved fear of abandonment. What is the antidote to the fear of abandonment? It's not a clever strategy or a tightly held boundary. It's not a firm no or a cold detachment. The real antidote I've come to understand through years of listening and sitting with pain is something much deeper and far more vulnerable. It is the felt sense of being safe, safe in the world, safe in our bodies, safe in our relationships. The antidote is to experience, maybe for the first time, that the world is not fundamentally out to harm us, and that connection does not inevitably end in pain. But how does one get there, especially if they didn't have that safety as a child? That's where healing begins its long, uncertain path. Through therapy, through compassionate self-reflection, through learning to be with one's feelings rather than escaping them, we start to reclaim the emotional safety that may never have been offered to us early on. It comes through inner work, not the kind that seeks to fix us, but the kind that helps us sit beside our own wounded parts without judgment. We learn that our feelings, as intense as they may be, are not dangerous. They're messengers. They want to be heard. And yet, for someone with narcissistic traits, this kind of work can be particularly hard, almost unbearable. Because to even begin such a journey requires the one thing they fear the most: vulnerability. While many of us, despite early wounding, eventually find our way into the long labor of self-understanding, those with narcissistic adaptations often struggle to even acknowledge the wound. There is almost always a sense of threat looming real or imagined, a feeling that something or someone is coming to hurt them. And sometimes, even when nothing is happening on the outside, there is still that inner voice whispering fear, reinforcing the sense of danger. For the narcissistic psyche, abandonment isn't just a fear, it's often at the top of the list. It's the ghost that haunts them quietly but persistently, even in the most stable of connections. And nowhere does this show up more vividly than in the dynamics of a narcissistic marriage. Imagine for a moment a partnership where one individual exhibits narcissistic behaviors. Often in these relationships, there's a recurring threat, a weapon really used over and over again, the threat of divorce. The narcissistic partner might say, "I'll leave. I'll call a lawyer. I'm done with this." And yet, in many cases, the non-narcissistic partner has no desire to end the marriage. They might stay because of the children, financial reasons, cultural beliefs, or religious values. But that doesn't prevent them from being subjected to the ongoing pressure of hearing that the relationship might collapse at any moment. What's happening here is not just conflict. It's a form of emotional manipulation, what some would call gaslighting. The threat itself becomes a tool of control. It keeps the other partner anxious, compliant, always watching their step, trying not to upset the one who holds the power to end it all. And this tactic, as painful as it sounds, is not uncommon. What's especially painful is how often this pattern repeats itself. The non-narcissistic partner might hear the same phrases again and again. "I'm calling a lawyer. This is over. I can't do this anymore." And in response, they begin to negotiate with the threat. "What do you need me to change? Tell me what to do. Please don't go." But then one day, something shifts. Perhaps it's exhaustion, or maybe it's the slow reclaiming of self-worth. Whatever the cause, the partner says something different. "You want a divorce? That's fine. Let's do it. I'm ready." And in that moment, something remarkable and revealing often happens. The narcissistic partner who has long threatened to leave suddenly recoils, They might say, "I didn't mean it." We can work this out. And what we're seeing here is not just a change of heart. It's the rupture of the narcissist's illusion of control. As long as they held the power to threaten and their partner wanted to stay, they felt secure in the upper hand. But the moment the partner says yes to leaving, the foundation shakes. The script flips. The control is lost. And the fear of abandonment, the one that's always been buried beneath the surface, comes roaring to the top. What do you mean, they might ask? How could you? This is what I mean when I say that abandonment is not just an occasional theme in these relationships, it's the bedrock. It's the undertow that pulls the strings. It's the ever-present echo shaping the dynamics, the behaviors, the hurt. And it's not about fault. It's about pain, unacknowledged, unresolved, and often unspoken. We cannot change others. We cannot rewrite their stories for them, but we can begin to understand. And sometimes that understanding brings with it not only compassion for what we've endured, but also the clarity we need to step toward our own healing. I hope that what we've explored today has offered you a deeper understanding of the fragility that quietly resides beneath narcissistic behavior. So often we speak of narcissism as if it were armor, impenetrable and cold. But when we truly look beneath the surface, we see that it's not strength that holds that structure together, but a deep fear and aching vulnerability that perhaps was never allowed to be seen or soothed. If this has happened to you, if you found yourself entangled in such a dynamic, I hope today's reflections have brought some clarity to your experience. Not to blame, not to justify, but to understand. Because in understanding, we begin to reclaim ourselves. And perhaps we also begin to soften the harshness of how we viewed others or ourselves. Thank you for taking this time to be here with me. It means a great deal that you've chosen to engage with this complex topic, to sit with it, and to look more closely at something that is often dismissed or misunderstood. Your presence, your curiosity, your willingness to listen. These are the very reasons I continue to share these reflections on psychological well-being. I always welcome your thoughts in the comments below, your questions, your insights, or even your personal stories, if you feel safe and comfortable sharing them. My hope is that we can create a space of mutual respect and compassion, where healing is not something we do alone, but something we discover together. And if you found something valuable in this video, I invite you to share it with someone who may need it. You never know how far a small act of sharing can reach. If this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue exploring the depths of human psychology and relationship. There is so much more to uncover, gently, slowly together. I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.